Well, welcome to Greater Manchester. I think it's quite apt that we're holding this discussion here today because, in my view, Greater Manchester over the past few years has become one of the most evidence literate cities, not only in the UK, but in the world. And it's what I mean by that is it uses data, it uses analysis, and it draws them together to create these compelling, coherent narratives, which are then used to inform and create innovative policy making. Now, I'm going to talk through the Greater Manchester story a bit in a minute, but I think it's just worth taking a second to talk about the role of cities. I think we're seeing internationally, globally, there's a trend of cities driving growth. They're the places that people are moving to, where businesses are moving to, and where innovation and new technologies are being used to best effect. Now, in the UK, you have London, which, it's the UK's capital city, but I'd argue it's also possibly the world's capital city. But underneath that, the second tier of cities in the UK are all underperforming. The Core Cities recently put out analysis which shows the big gap between the UK's productivity and the Core Cities' productivity. Now, that's something that I think we should be concerned about and addressing in any case. But we're in this sort of weird post-referendum, pre-Brexit, uncertain time in which I think cities should be the bedrocks and the steady foundations of growth. Now, national policy has I think, recognised the underperformance of cities recently. And we've seen things like Northern Powerhouse, devolution, which have, to a small extent, started to move away from this very centralised tendency that we have in the UK. And I think that is thanks to places like Greater Manchester, to things like the City Growth Commission, which used a robust evidence base and sound economics to make the case for change. So I think that's a really recent example of the role and the potential that evidence can have to change things. So looking at Greater Manchester, I'm sure most of you know the story, but been working together for about 30 years. And I think evidence and the use of evidence has been something that officers and members have been passionate about and has been central to the journey from the start. You have 10 very interconnected local authorities for a variety of reasons, underbounded, etc. But you could show that through just some statistics, through a map. But what Greater Manchester has done is it's taken that and created these narratives and this storytelling, which creates this ability to corral and bring together all of the people who work within those areas to a single and to a shared objective. And that may sound easy, but Greater Manchester, like other places, has got big differences in terms of deprivation, skills levels, where the employment growth is. But through having this underpinning evidence base and through having these compelling narratives, it's meant that all are working together towards this shared trajectory. I think there's two particular moments that I'd just like to spell out in terms of how Greater Manchester has been at the vanguard, really, of this area. The first is the MIA, so the Manchester Independent Economic Review, undertaken in 2008-9, cost 1.3 million, took 18 months to deliver. And what this was, well, first of all, it's a great example of the shared and collective commitment to use of evidence from the 10 local authorities, because at the time this was the biggest ever undertaking of this type. And what it did at the same time was it had that word independent in it. So this wasn't an internal exercise, which if you get your negative results, you can sort of hide them a bit. This invited in leading experts such as Ed Glazer, Jim O'Neill and Diane Coyle to take this non-biased view and to give this assessment of what is the economy of Greater Manchester, how does it work, where are the gaps in your current evidence base? And it created this economic baseline and came out with 10 very strong, robust recommendations for how Greater Manchester needed to change. Now, what this did was create and raise that level of debate in this area in Greater Manchester. So then you have the launch of the report, and I think we've probably all seen it in other places, that you launch a report and you either put it on the shelf or people take it off in silos to go and implement the recommendations. But there was another stage to the process, which I think was, for me, the most important stage, that they took this on a roadshow around the 10 local authorities. Now, this was first of all to discuss what were the findings of MIA, what is agglomeration economy, but it also was to raise awareness and to change the culture and to embed data and evidence at the forefront of policy making. And that then creates the demand for more evidence. So, because otherwise, I think you can have a very good research and intelligence function that's coming out with some terrific reports. But if people aren't using them, what's the point? So after the MIA, Greater Manchester responded with the Greater Manchester Strategy. That was refreshed in 2012-13 because, changing economic context with the recession, and also because local authorities were having to make big efficiency savings. This led to what I think was the second most important moment for Greater Manchester. They undertook a comprehensive mapping of all public sector spend as a place. And they also created their own cost-benefit analysis model to start to assess the value for money of public sector transformation projects. Now, that was in terms of fiscal, economic, and social value for money. And what this meant is it assessed projects in terms of both how it is a value for that service area, but also the value it has for Greater Manchester as a whole. So what this meant was that if a pilot was working, you can quickly upscale it and mainstream it. It also means you can change things, or you can stop doing something if it's not proving right. Now, if you take these two things together, and bear with me, this is a very, very simple analysis of this, but if you've created this very robust economic baseline and your understanding of your economy, so that's on the growth side. They've also started to really understand how public services work and start to look on the reform side, what residents actually need and what's working. If you take those two parts together, you're starting to get a really good evidence base as a place. Now, Greater Manchester took this and turned this into this narrative, this case for change, which it could then take down to London. And working with national government, it was the proposals, look, we've got the evidence that shows that these things aren't working. This is how we can potentially grow. What do we need to change in terms of national policy? What more powers do we need? Now, that led to the devolution agreements. I'm not even sure what number we're on now in Greater Manchester, 3, 4, 5. But I think this is all because this is very much underpinned by this strong evidence base. So that's a very, very quick canter through what Greater Manchester has done. What do I think we can take from this for other places? For me, there's 3 points, and I'll finish on this. So firstly, that you need to invest in your evidence. Now, that's both in terms of the people who are generating it, who are analysing it, who are creating those narratives, but also you need to invest the time in all of your officers to create that demand and understanding across the local authority or the city region of then using that evidence. Secondly, you need to continually reassess what you're doing. So that's reassessing in terms of evaluating your services, and then that goes back into building your evidence base, which then in turn goes back into creating and changing your policies. But it's also reassessing what's your methodology for creating that evidence. So you can't just say, this is how we do it, that's full stop, because the parameters need to move all the time. I'm pretty sure that Greater Manchester won't be standing still with this, and I think I've heard talk of randomised control trials here now, which is another step forward. And then finally, it's about being bold. So it's about being bold in terms of being able to accept the potential for negative results, because they all inform you and you then can work on those and change. But it's also being bold in that when you have the confidence that you have that robust evidence base, that you will change policies and be innovative as a result of that. That could be within your local authority, but it could also be challenging national policy and doing things differently. So those are my 3 takeaways, and and thank you. I'll finish there.